Welcome to the Journal of Expressive Writing feature and open mic. Tonight, we are so excited to have poet Heather Treseler here to read for us tonight from her new book, Auguries and Divinations, and then have our open mic with potentially 15 readers who have signed up. We're going to start with Heather and I will introduce her. And I want to introduce you right now to Jen Minotti, who is the founder and editor of the Journal of Expressive Writing. I know Jen will love to say hello to you. Jen?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Heather, for being here as our featured author, and Katerina for your help. I missed all of you over the summer. Kelly and I did. So we're just so thrilled. We have a lineup already through the end of the year, which we will get onto our website soon. And Birdman 313, I was thinking about you because you see my video. I have a new video camera. So I was very gray and you could hardly see me last year. And I, over the summer, was determined to fix this problem. So anyway, here I am.
Birdman,
A
thank
new and
you.
improved version at your
Jen,
encouragement. Birdman 313.
Jen has had a makeover. Terrific.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Thanks, everybody.
And I'm so glad you mentioned we do take off July and August, and this is our first time back together, and we do have a really wonderful lineup of readers, including Heather, for tonight and in October and November and December. And I think Jen has registration open on almost all of those. So just a reminder, sign up in advance for to get the links and to read in our open mic if you would like to. It really fills up fast, so I encourage you to get there quickly. And Jen will be announcing more about that later tonight. Right. As many of you know who have been here before, I like to open our evening with a poem by someone to sort of just bring us in. It's a gathering experience of bringing us all into this amazing room that we share together on this evening. And tonight I have brought for us, ignore my desktop, which is really a crazy mess. That's not what I meant to do. Okay. I'm going to stop share. I wanted to share the poem with you, but I seem to be not doing a good job of that, so I'm not going to bother. I want to read to you, Jenny.
Kelly, we saw it. We saw the poem.
Okay. All right. Well, would you like to see it again? I will do my best to get it. Because I think it's sometimes nice to see the poems that I read. I want to read this tonight by Jenny Johnson. Summoning the body that is mine when I shut my eyes. Maybe everybody, you want to shut your eyes. Please consider that if you do. Don't have to. Summoning the body that is mine when I shut my eyes. Come, second heartbeat sounding in the breast. Come, prismatic light dissembling. Come, familiar spirit. Come, bare-chested in the weeds. Come, private imposter. Come, hidden ballast. Come, sudden departures. Come, stress without shape because belief is odd. Come, swaggering answer. Come, invisible ink. Come, beatific scrawl. Come as squirrels are climbing backwards. Come as dogwood blossoms come apart. Come strumming an unspeakable power ballad through a torrent of rain with cheeks flushed scarlet. Come down the rusty metal slide. Come belted kingfisher flapping. Come lavender asters wheeling. Come loose a sapling lengthening. Come honeysuckle. Come glistening.
Mm.
Thank you, Jenny Johnson. All right, now I am going to introduce our featured reader for tonight. Heather Treseler is the author of Auguries and Divinations, which received the 2023 May Sarton, New Hampshire Prize and was a finalist for the 2024 New England Book Award in Poetry. And also author of Parturition, which received the International Chapbook Award from the Munster Literature Centre in Ireland. Her poems appear in Harvard Review, the Iowa Review, the Irish Times, Narrative, and the American Scholar, and have received the W.B. Yeats Prize and the Missouri Review's Editor's Prize. Her criticism appears in LARB, Boston Review, and in 8 books about American poetry. She's professor of English at Worcester State University and a scholar at the Brandeis Women's Studies Research Center. Auguries and Divinations is published by Bahan Publishing. It tracks a young woman's coming of age, attuned to the unspoken rules and liabilities of women's lives, the suburban underworld, and the energies of Eros. An older woman, Lucy, becomes the narrator's Beatrice in love and survival, and she returns to New England, seasoned and ready to claim a life of her own making, drawing on her study of the love lyric, from Catullus to Frank Bidart, and the classical practice of augury, or observing the birds, to discern human fate. Brad Crenshaw, in choosing the book for the May Sarton New Hampshire Poetry Prize, notes, Heather is compelling. We immediately want to listen to her the way we might listen to a lyric singer full of melody and rhythm. But make no mistake, running through all her lyricism is a staring, unblinking intelligence that informs us about what she sees. Her vision is inclusive, generous, wide-ranging, and enthralling. And I want to mention a sentence or two from Eileen Cleary's review of Auguries and Divinations that was in Solstice. Eileen Cleary writes, according to Heather, childhood is a cold planet warmed by women. Maternal figures and mothers populate the verse throughout the book from the moment we learn that the first empire is mother, until the closing poems where we discover that motherhood is not required to speak a mother tongue. Let's welcome Heather Treseler, and thank you for being here with us tonight.
Thank you, Kelly, so much for that lovely, really capacious introduction. And thanks, Jen, also for hosting me here tonight. And thanks to all of you for coming and finding a spot for poetry in your life this evening. I'm going to read 5 poems this evening, 3 poems from the book that was published just about 6 months ago, Auguries and Divinations. And then I'll read 2 poems from a new manuscript in process that I started this summer, which seems to be essentially a manuscript of love poems. My working title for this new manuscript is something like Love Under Neoliberalism, even though that title makes it sound more like a public policy paper than a collection of poems. So if folks have better ideas for titles for the new manuscript, I'd be grateful for suggestions. When we were chatting beforehand, Kelly mentioned that she's staying in a Marriott hotel while she's on the road conferencing, which is quite well suited to how I'm going to start things off. I'm going to read a love poem that's called Marriott Ode. And my friends make fun of me because I do love Marriott hotels. You always know exactly what you're going to get when you stay at a Marriott, which can be very reassuring. So I'll begin here. Marriott Ode. We will never stay in that Tallahassee hotel with a tiki bar and mermaid tub, or the one in Reno with lava lamps, shag carpet, Elvis waiters, and glinting mirrors on the bedroom ceiling. It's doubtful that we'll ever splurge on the Ritz, or the Burlington bed and breakfast, known for its raspberry ricotta croissants, given our dislike of forced friendliness with strangers. Middle-aged, but still eldest children, we are squares who covet the rectangles of milled soap, crisply folded sheets, a thermostat, and sturdy suitcase stand. No frills check in, and no one at the bar checking us out. In the anonymity of rooms that do not speak a word of those they've housed, surfaces are unscarred. There's no text here to be read or interpreted, so our hermeneutics can take a nap in a well-made bed. For emergency reflection, a drawer yields pens, paper, and a chubby Book of Mormon. And if the conference table makes it feel more boardroom than boudoir, more Staples than Shangri-La, well, something about this rectitude lets us unbutton. We have dropped from our lives for a night. No one but the front desk and our credit cards know we're here. You love the ice bucket, the no porn TV, a workhorse coffee pot, newspapers in the lobby. An unlikely place for debauchery, but of an ordinary sort. Not aerobic sport, but ardent, familiar. Among abundant pillows, we feel free. Our prim, almost staid look, a private joke, a come on. Whatever we do here needn't return home. Some go to Mardi Gras, discreet resorts, offshore bacchanals, seeking something unleashed, a little wild. Our liberty has two integers, no ledger, no record, no camera, just license behind closed doors and poached eggs on toast come morning. The next poem I'll read is from the book, and in reading it, I'm also going to share my screen because this particular poem makes reference to a painting that I'm sure you all know. It's Seurat's painting Sunday Afternoon on the Grand Jatte, but sometimes it's useful just to have a visual reminder of sorts. I'll also say that there are three useful things to know in connection with this poem, the title of which is Purpura, which is a Latin word meaning purple. And the three things are this. So purple was the costliest color in the ancient world, in part because it was an extremely expensive and apparently quite smelly process to make it. It involved harvesting thousands of mollusks from the Mediterranean and sort of pulverizing them in a vat and extracting this dye that came to be associated with royalty because it was so expensive to make and to purchase. The second thing is that the poem borrows a line from a very famous poem by Elizabeth Bishop called One Art, which is maybe one of the best elegies in the English language. And in that poem, Bishop has a tiny line which reads, "I lost my mother's watch." And I'm a Bishop scholar, and in my study of materials in Bishop's archive, I've really become fairly convinced that Bishop very much meant for that line to have at least two meanings. So she lost both her mother's wristwatch, but also when she was 5 years old, her mother was institutionalized. And she literally lost her mother's supervision or overwatch, as you would. The last thing I'll add about this poem is that it makes reference to a fairly serious illness that my mother had when I was 13, which has purpura in its title because it involves the breakdown of blood vessels. And I always feel obliged to say, if I'm reading this, I want to assure the audience that my mom, who's now over 70 and going strong, is very much with us. So the lived analog to this poem has a very happy ending. So with all of that introduction, I'm going to share my screen. And like Kelly, I also have a very messy desktop, so bear with me a moment.
Very creative. We have very creative desktops.
That's a good way of putting it. I'll go with that. Hopefully everyone can see the painting. Yeah. Okay. Can everyone see the painting? Yes. Okay, great. Okay. So Purpura. When the poet wrote, "I lost my mother's watch," we knew she meant more than a timepiece. To watch over the soft-skulled, expulsive being that is baby is a genre of love that must break its own clock. In my first years, I slept little. When I slept, I left my eyes garage doors open. Poor mother thought, baby awake, mother awake. For months, staring contests in the half dark, calling each other's bluff, falling in love as any pair must, with desire and jealousy, jostling furniture in the psyche, heady hormonal rush. When I lost my mother's watch, I was 13, the day unaccountably bright. Fields of flora bloomed under her skin as if she were a lavender hat in Seurat's famed painting. An ambulance rolled its orange glass eye at her strange beauty. For weeks, we waited for her body to lose its artistic ambition. Toxic drugs, confusion. Doctors asked, "Who is president? What year is it? Can you name your children?" Purpura, the broken blood vessels in her skin's pointless painting. Some code or augury to read and remember. I watched, thinking of Phoenicians finding the world's costliest color in the crushed bodies of murex. Vats of pulverized mollusks to trim the general's cloak, dye an emperor's robe purple. What a tyrant or a daughter claims as her right, calling it nature. The first empire is mother. Okay. So, this next poem is entitled Factories at Clichy, and it also requires just a little bit of background. So all of us know, of course, Van Gogh's ecstatic, beautiful, colorful paintings of starry nights and fields of flowers and other things. There's also a painting of his that I'll show you in just a second, which was painted just 3 years before his death. And it's somewhat unusual for Van Gogh in as much as it shows an industrial scene. So Clichy is a suburb of Paris. It's northwest of Paris. And even to this day, I'm told it's a fairly gritty suburb. There's still a lot of factories, a lot of air pollution. And what's interesting to me about this painting is that it essentially has 3 bands. You'll see a sky with billowing smoke, you'll see the factories, and then you'll see a field. And if you squint a little bit, you'll be able to make out 2 figures standing in sort of the center of that field. It's hard to tell their class, their gender, even their relationship, but they're standing very closely together. This painting is housed at the St. Louis Art Museum. And while I lived in St. Louis, I used to go with my friend Lucy, and we would always stop and look at this painting. And as many of you who are museum lovers probably know, at a certain point, you start to feel as though the painting is yours, right? Because you go to see it so often and it becomes a sort of part of the texture of your life. So I'll share my screen again, and we will look at this next painting. Let me just move it along here. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Little fancy footwork. Okay. And you get to see my messy desktop again. My creative desktop, to use Kelly's description. Okay, so this is Van Gogh's painting. And this is the accompanying poem, Factories at Clichy. We came to think of it as our painting, two figures embracing in a corrugated field, its patina of sunlight and stroked grasses beside the soot stacks of factories, their stern faces flat as prisons, plumes of smoke unraveling the shirt of sky. You can't have Paris without the mills of Clichy, you say. And I think of night cafes, an opera house flanked by winged horses, balconies spilling like bosoms in bloom. Morning streets, swept and rinsed clean as a sleeper's eyes of tussled dream. You have the rest of your life to work, you add, with such pointed sharpness that I kiss you in the gallery where the touching of art is otherwise prohibited, and an ancient light or shadow falls across your face. How Van Gogh's lovers, narrow and undefined, clutch each other as if at sole possessions, released from assembly lines to this unruly field of wild rye, long-haired rue, meadow of another age, I might have walked with you. And that poem is an ekphrastic poem, of course. It's also, I think, a sort of love poem, and also an elegy, as the subject of the painting, Lucy, passed on 6 years ago. Okay, so I'll read another poem from the book, which concerns female friendship. So one of the things that I learned when I moved to my current hometown was that Maxine Kumin and Anne Sexton, two very important mid-century American women writers, began their literary careers while they were living here in Newton and raising children. So they actually met attending a evening writing course in Boston with John Holmes. They started carpooling together from Newton, and way led on to way, they became very close friends and collaborators. And when I interviewed Maxine in 2015, she talked about how they carried on their poetry workshop between the two of them by getting a private landline between their houses. So they each, of course, had standard landlines that anyone could call. But then they also got a second private number that only the two of them would use. And they would workshop their poems on the phone with each other. And when one or more of them had to attend to a crying baby or change out the laundry, they would both leave the phones off the hook. And when they were ready to resume working on their writing, they would whistle into the phone line to sort of, as a primitive intercom, to call each other back to work on those poems together. And this anecdote always kind of stuck with me. So this poem is called Wire, and it begins with an epigraph from my interview of Maxine, in which she said, speaking of her friendship with Anne Sexton and what it was like to be a woman in the 1960s, breaking into the literary establishment, she said, quote, "We were viewed as some species of rare, flightless bird." And this is in the voice of of Maxine Kumin. I cradled the phone in one hand, poem in another, schooled by years of reading while babies nursed. Book, breast, and a baby's fawn head forming a triptych, feeding in the dark. When Anne and I got serious, we split the cost of a private line, calling to read each other drafts between lunch and the laundry. Each hour a petty theft from the ordinary. Homemaking in all its glory. I took my master's at Radcliffe 8 months along, and they made me promise I would not continue. From Stendhal to diapers. I still hear Anne's voice on the wire. She whistled into the receiver when she was ready. Half lullaby, half cigarette cackle, teasing me to venture beyond the known and tidy, to make stories of our lives, of what we saw and knew. Somehow, this was revolution, and we were each other's invented freedom, the best we could have or hope for in a mother or lover, a comrade. For once, I had enough. With Anne, I was infant, unable to speak in dumb delight, beside cry and suckle, mule and hard greedy draw. But by law of what is female, she woke in me a wail, and we fed each other, growing books and names like the strangely misshapen hero vegetables of suburban gardens, dim with soil and sublimation. In the antiphone of call and answer, we learned to put it all on the line. I guess that could also be subtitled an ode to AT&T and the private lines of the 1960s. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing all the readers and the open mic. And I'm going to close tonight with one more poem from the manuscript in process, which is also a love poem. And it's entitled Awake in the Dark with You. And I read this to a group recently, and there was a good friend of mine who's a philosopher was in the audience, and she said, "Who's that philosopher you reference?" And so I'll clue you in. The philosopher I reference is Derrida, who was just sort of ubiquitous as a name and a theorist when I was in school, at least in undergrad. His ideas and his name was sort of inescapable. Awake in the dark with you. Did the clock slip from its shelf to slither dolly style? Or had you turned it over so its bright red squirrel eyes wouldn't spy our naked shoulders, turning like verse, like Horace's plow, as we spendthrifts sleep for bed's other leisure? Entwined with you, I think of the French theorist, praised for decades like a tutelary god. His name almost a verb like prince or share. His notion of slippage, a gap between word and signifier, as in my hunger and my name's for you. An idea legible in any toddler, carnal, or mortuary howl. I tent the duvet over the scene of our bodies blending, and think of his less touted idea, that all friendship lives under the sign of death. Beloved bonds, too. Suddenly, I am no longer spent or sleepy, but desiring, frightened, eager to keep the colt in my chest fenced inside your forelimbs, your breath thrumming my cheek, your eyes' whites catching runaway light as it grows around each window. If eternity were awake in the night with you, naked as birth, shorn of the daily mattering, left to the quiddity of ourselves before we knew the nouns sun or clock, hour or death or day, having first lived inside another and having yearned there alone in separate darks, pure animal verb. Thank you all so much, and I'll turn the floor back over to Kelly.
What, you're done reading? What? Oh dear. I didn't want you to stop. I think others may may feel that way as well. Heather, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the poem about the Marriott, which is hilarious and wonderful for me to be experiencing in this room. So wonderfully described. I'm so glad I sort of instinctively picked the poem Summoning the Body. Thank you for summoning the body so beautifully and effectively in this reading. The mother's body, the friends, the daughters, that's really was really special. Thank you. And we've got one or two questions in the chat room, and I want to first ask you for my own interest. I'm curious about how you became a bishop scholar, just like what your origin point was for that.
Sure. So I think it actually dates back to my undergrad days. I was almost a classics major undergrad. I took a lot of classes in Latin. And I'm also from Massachusetts originally. And the poet I was working with, the late Michael Harper, really believes strongly that it's important to learn the poets from the place you're from. So he got me reading all kinds of 20th century Massachusetts poets. And when I hit Elizabeth Bishop, I was very intrigued by her own background in the classics, but also how she kind of married that to modernist surrealism and made something all of her own in terms of her style and her dexterity. So my interest in her and my interest in her archive actually was what propelled me to go on for a doctorate in literature. I sometimes joke that Bishop was like my covert MFA because I spent a lot of time sort of looking at her writing process and trying to piece together her writing process from what I could find in her archives. So I've been living with Bishop in some way. I think since I was 17 or so.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, the poem, you reference Bishop and Surratt and your own mother. There are so many textures and layers, and I think people are commenting on that dexterity in the chat room, and so appreciating your reading. Leslie Newstead is asking, do you set out to write about a particular theme and write into it, or do you write more spontaneously? And of course, we're all writers here, and I think if you don't mind talking a bit about craft, I think it would be really interesting to know whatever you be willing to share about your own process. Where does the poem come from? Is, at one point the art maybe inspires it, or the ekphrastic piece that you shared, or how? What would you say about your own process for us?
First of all, that's a lovely question, and so thank you to Leslie for asking it. And I'll do my best to give a coherent answer. That particular poem, the poem Purpura, is one that I was literally trying to write for about 20 years. And when I was working with Michael as an undergrad, and I worked with him for about 4 years, at a certain point, he looked at the poems that I was working with or producing at that moment, and he said, you just need to be patient. It might take you 20 years to write the kinds of poems you're trying to write. And I wish he were still with us, because his prophecy was completely spot on. This book appeared almost 20 years to the year that he happened to say that. So I guess for me, sort of being patient with processes being something that may actually extend over years and may extend over 50 or 60 drafts. I'm a big believer for myself in writing is really being in the revision process. That being said, I often know that there's something I want to write about, and I have to kind of wait until I have what I think of as like a point of entry into the poem, which might be the first line, it might be an image, it might be a set of sounds, but that's kind of the way that I find my on-ramp almost into the subject matter. But sometimes the lag in time between my knowing that I want to write about something and finding that on-ramp, if you will, is sometimes months, sometimes even a year or longer. So I do a lot of wool gathering, as I'm sure most of us do. And then I've had to kind of learn to be patient for that moment of flint to kind of light the fire, as it were, for the draft. If that makes sense. I think I'm mixing, fire metaphors and car metaphors, but
well, maybe, but that's great. But I'm curious about what it was like to hear that. It is so startling and wonderful to hear. So it may take you, and I think there may be other poets here who in the room, or other writers. It may take you 20 years to write the poems you want to write. I'm curious about what it felt like to hear that in the moment.
well, I think I was like most 17 to 20-year-olds, as much as I thought that was preposterous, and I was sort of impatient with that whole idea. But at the same time, I also respected him and his wisdom deeply enough to know that he might be right. And so I immediately got curious about what it might be that I would need to do to sort of begin that process. And he was a good guide in helping me kind of find my way. So for me, it meant, among other things, just applying to doctoral programs and essentially kind of apprenticing myself to the library for 6 years. And for me, as a 20-something-year-old, workshops weren't the most congenial setting for my psyche. So I found my path kind of through the library, and then through a few trusted readers that I've worked with over the years. So yeah, I wish I could go back in time and comfort 21-year-old Heather,
Yeah.
who felt like crestfallen, but also kind of enticed, because I felt as though he saw where I was trying to get to, and was supportive, but also very honest about what it might take.
Crestfallen and enticed. That's such a wonderful way to talk about that. A great pairing of words. So very moving to hear your poems, particularly about friendship and literary friendship. And I was sort of feeling that there were probably other people in here tonight that were thinking about, who do they trust with their creative process, their writing process? Who is their close collaborator? Maxine and Anne Sexton, Maxine Kumin and Anne Sexton were just such a pairing. And you describe so beautifully the intimacy of and the wonderful sort of dual meaning of the line. And I guess I just wanted to note that I think other people, it was very stirring to think about that sense of finding someone who really you feel like you can collaborate with in a literary way, to write with, to share that. And so if anybody wants to comment on that in the chat room about maybe your own relationship with another writer or writers that you feel like really you're able to create with them and trust them, maybe that would be something lovely that you might be willing to share. Those of you who are listening, you also say venture, you said venture, and this, I think it was the last poem or the second to last poem, venture beyond the known and tidy.
Mhm.
Was that in the Maxine Kuhlman poem? Yeah, okay. So it
Right.
seemed to me a beautiful way of describing also what you do
Mm.
in your writing. And were you aware of that, or were you aligned with that awareness? Or it was
Um,
you were
yeah.
so connected to Maxine Kuhlman and her persona in that poem. And I remember hearing it or reading it when it was published. So
Sure.
anything you want to say about that? Venturing beyond the known and tidy as a way of creating poetry?
Yeah. So I guess two things come to mind. One is, that line in Virginia Woolf in which I think it's in one of her essays, and she says that women think through their mothers, and in a way, thinking about Kuhlman and Sexton and what they were doing now 60 years ago when they were first starting out was a way of thinking about both my mother and my grandmother's lives and what that culture was like, but also sort of our inheritance or my inheritance as a woman who's writing essentially in the same geography as Kuhlman and Sexton. And then the other thing I'll say, Kelly, about what I admire about their relationship and that I think is almost sacred, if that's not too strong a word, between writers who find that uniquely collaborative energy between them. There's a wonderful passage in a piece by Christopher Bolas, the famous psychoanalyst, and he says he compares the way that a parent holds an infant or a child and sort of adopts to the kids, like, moving around and need for water and various things, that kind of holding zone, that aesthetic holding zone or physical holding zone, as being akin to what a work of art can do for us as viewers or as readers. Is it provides a kind of holding zone for us to experience a kind of deep psychic knowing and comfort. And I think in many ways that extends, in the best of circumstances, to a close collaborator or artist that you're working alongside. You sort of offer that holding zone for each other. So when I'm working with one of the two people I share drafts with, sometimes I will send them a draft and just know that they will put it aside and let me send them a revision in 4 days, with a comment, an email entitled, please read this version, which I'm sure we're probably all sent.
Mhm.
So I guess that's a long way of answering your very elegant question.
Well, being on the line with each other, it's just such a wonderful idea. So thank you. Thank you for answering that so beautifully. And, it actually is a great point of transition, because I just want to mention, as we move into the open mic, that we are featuring next month a group of 4 women writers who write together and also have books published with Lily Poetry Review. And that would include Eileen Clary, who I know is here tonight, who will be one of the readers. And so I'm going to actually tee up the continuance of this conversation, supporting each other as writers, till also to continue with that next time. But I don't know, this has just been so beautiful, gorgeous, and moving, Heather. We are so grateful to you for being here with us tonight. and sharing your beautiful writing with us, and also the fabulous introductions. And as I think Leslie said, the backstory that was really helpful to know. Thank you. Thank you so much. I know that people are going to continue to chat about this in the room.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Kelly. And I'm looking forward to hearing everyone else's poems very much. So I'll turn my sound off now.
Okay. Oh, thank you. All right. I am going to remove my spotlight, and we are going to be getting ready to spotlight our wonderful reader list. And we are going to be starting with Karen Edwards, and then Mary Ladaney, and then Mindy. I hope I got your last name right. Mindy Metajasovic. You can correct me if I'm not correct on that. Okay, so just the reminder to, oh, also I need to turn off the recording. So